When you work up a patient, how do you like when you look at it, there's obviously a lot of potential root causes for cancer, right? There's different therapies that you're adding in. I mean, I talk to patients who are like, well, when's there going to be a cure for cancer? And my general take is, well, there's a lot of different potential causes. You could have low vitamin D, you can have insulin resistance, you can have exposure to different toxins in the environment, chemicals, plastics, pesticides, beyond hormonal compounds that are driving. There's a lot of different root causes. So when you're looking at a patient, do you one, do you subscribe to that similar belief? And then two, are you working patients up and looking at all of the potential root causes and trying to address those while you're doing these other therapies at the same time? How do you frame that out? How do you assess that?
Uh, well, that's an interesting question. I think, on the one hand, I could certainly say that, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different things that can contribute to somebody developing
Right.
cancer. On the other hand, on a practical level, I find that, whether somebody's cancer developed primarily because of toxic exposures or whether it didn't, I'm still going to be focusing a lot on detoxification because, for
Yeah.
one thing, we live in a polluted world. For another, the process of getting rid of the cancer, you got to think, where does it go? It's, in other words, you kill it, but you've still got to get rid of the pieces.
Yeah.
Something's got to be removed. And so they're all going to need to address detoxification, no matter whether the cause of their cancer per se was toxins or not. And the
Mhm.
same thing would go for vitamin D. Even if vitamin D deficiency wasn't the fundamental cause, they
Right.
still need to have their vitamin D optimized.
Mhm.
So in a way, some of the why questions, from my point of view, kind of come out in the wash in the sense that I'm going to be doing or trying to address the same considerations, whether that was the bottom line issue or not.
Right. That makes sense. Makes sense. And so when you're working with a patient, you're working them up. Are there any specific lab markers that you like to look at? I mean, are you running? Imagine you're probably running vitamin D. You can tell me. Are you looking at things like C-reactive protein? Are you looking at fasting insulin? Do you run any like cancer antigen markers? Like, what are your favorite kind of go-tos to kind of get
Mhm.
assess the playing field, so to speak?
Right. Y- I may well wind up expanding that at some point, but to a large extent, we learned what we did, Dr. Gonzalez and I, from Dr. William Donald Kelly, and a lot of
Yeah.
the tests were not available in his
Yeah. They
era.
weren't.
And for that matter, I started doing this work in the early 90s, and a lot of these tests were only barely becoming into existence at that point.
Right.
So I've really learned to do a lot just with my clinical impression of situations.
Hmm.
And a lot of the standard markers or the markers that you just mentioned can actually be very confusing. For example, C-reactive protein, that might go up before it goes down. Why?
Hmm.
Because breaking up cancer is an inflammatory situation.
Yeah.
The white cells and the macrophages and things that chew up and get rid of stuff require inflammation to do their thing. So,
Right.
just like it would be, I would think, counterproductive if somebody had pneumonia to completely try to squelch their inflammation because that inflammation is fighting the pathogen that's causing the
Yeah.
problem.
Right.
So I don't necessarily want to squelch inflammation altogether. And so it makes me a little wary because people kind of have this mindset, oh, inflammation, that's bad. Inflammation causes cancer. Well, and chronic inflammation can cause cancer, but to get rid of it, you may need an inflammatory process for a while. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's complicated, bottom line.
Yeah, your body has to basically start to break down these cancer cells, and that can be a little bit inflammatory. Just like exercising can be a little bit inflammatory, but it's enough where your body can be on top of it, and you're keeping your detoxification pathways open to be able to process all of that as well.
Exactly. Right.
And typically, your body does apoptosis, right? That's like programmed cell death. Like if you look at
Mhm.
the average person, what do you think the big barrier to the body starting to not be able to keep track of this apoptosis and not be able to continue to monitor cells so they don't overgrow? What's the first thing that goes wrong?
Gosh, I don't know. I think I might be able to win a Nobel Prize if I
I know,
answered
right?
that one. But again, the underlying theme in our work is pancreatic enzymes, a shortage
Yeah.
of those proteolytic enzymes. And, bear in mind that in the regular medical literature, the idea that proteolytic enzymes did more than digest food is relatively new. We're just talking about, the last 15, 20 years that there's been more and more research about what proteolytic enzymes do systemically as opposed to just like digesting food. So, there's an 80-page article about proteases that I referenced, and something I recently wrote up about pancreatic enzymes. And, among the things that's talked about is the immune system and,
Yeah.
some of the autophagy and et cetera.